So, introduce Scott Greene. I've known Scott for many years through Forensic Expert Witness Association. Scott and I had many conversations in some of the national board meetings about doing some of the presentations online. I don't know if you remember about that, Scott, 8 years ago, and it was summarily dismissed. So now we get to do these presentations online every month, so over here and safe. So Scott is a digital forensics expert. He has his company in Arizona, and he does work literally all over. So he's not just in Arizona, he works all over the country and actually some international cases. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll shut up and go away.
Very good. Welcome everybody to Tucson, Arizona. We're from Tucson, Arizona, I guess. Okay, y'all should see a screen now, true?
We see your screen.
Very good. So what I'm going to talk about today is I've been asked to talk about, specifically we were going to talk about and converse about PDF documents, but I'm also going to talk about metadata in general because it's everywhere. It's in everything you can imagine. Places where you wouldn't even think there's metadata. And so I chose to use metadata as the kind of the framework that we're going to discuss today, and some specific cases that I've actually been in, so that you can get a feel for where metadata is and what it is, and what I use it for as a digital forensics expert. So frequently we're presented with data. I know you all know this. Frequently presented with data that we think is perfectly normal and supports a particular side of a case. And that frequently comes in the form of printouts or even PDF documents. And in my world, a PDF document and printouts are very similar because they're just it's a printer on a computer. However, once they've been rendered to PDF, then more data can be added or deleted or modified from those PDF documents. They're editable as well. So software, by its very nature, this last sentence here, is capable of printing things in its order. So as we'll see in some of the examples, while the data was actually put into certain files in a different order than it's displayed, software actually organizes that data before it gets printed out, and so it's difficult sometimes to look at what you see on the screen or on PDF documents and figure out what happened. Oop, that's something on it. So what you don't see when we look at electronically stored information, ESI as it's frequently referred to, is data that's been manipulated. It's not evident when you just look at the printouts or look at a document necessarily. People can cover their tracks frequently. And so reports that come out of various systems, and we're going to look at that in some medical areas, are generated in perfect order. And so the data looks like it was put in that order. Unfortunately, the software is overriding the data entry dates, things like that, that would actually cause it to be displayed in a different particular order. So let's talk about metadata. Metadata is data about the data. It can be everything from just where a picture was taken. So if you have, for instance, location services turned on your phones, on your cell phones, then the data about where you are on the planet, the GPS coordinates, what your elevation is, the type of camera, what type of settings, whether the flash went off, are all embedded into the actual JPEG. It's got it's called EXIF data, and that data is set up to be extensible. And so there are times when that data is actually quite large, and there's a lot of it in there that's stuffed into a photo. But in general, it's who entered the data, who last edited the data. Sometimes there's how many versions of the document have been created. Other things that we see in documents in particular is how long it was edited. So was it just 30 minutes or was it 4 hours? Things like that. We see that in AutoCAD. There's a lot of information about versions and things like AutoCAD documents and stuff like that. And then we also see it in Outlook and
Do you take
Exchange.
questions? Do you take questions during your presentation, or do we need to wait till after?
I am happy to address questions whenever you would like.
I just want to make sure I understood that you said you were reading all this metadata on PDF documents. Is that right?
Well, metadata is actually embedded in all kinds of things. It is embedded in PDF documents, but metadata is everywhere.
You have a software. So you have a software that allows you to open those PDFs and get in there and get whatever you need.
Yes, I do, and you may too, as well, because some software, some of the just standard software, will let you see quite a few things in the PDF document about metadata. And we'll look at that later. The software that I'm going to use to show you PDF documents and metadata that's embedded in PDF documents is actually off-the-shelf software for what we're doing today. I do have some other software that dives deeper, but I wanted to show you all how to look at metadata in PDF documents with software that you may already have.
And you're going to identify what that software is.
Yes, happy to.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I like interactive presentations. It's way easier when everybody's in the same room. So, how am I going to get there today? I'm going to review civil case where data was manipulated in a medical billing system. I'm going to show how data can be manipulated in electronic medical record systems. I would think in your group that medical records, at least in their former paper form, were things that you all reviewed. Is that true? Everybody answer once. That was a question from the speaker.
Yeah, actually, the answer to your question, Scott, is yes. And I have a medical malpractice case right now where everything's done electronically, but I don't have the electronic files. I just have printouts. So that and PDFs of what was done on the electronic tablet. So that becomes interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Scott, this is Ann Smith. Not more, but most of our documents are signature documents that have been converted to a PDF.
Okay. Good. Then our exploration of PDF, the deep dive in PDFs at the end of this will be helpful. And then we're going to look at a case if we have time, and somebody can keep me on time. We can review a case where email was fabricated. We'll talk about how that looks as well. So for the first case, this case occurred many years ago, but it's a signature case because of the way it was handled by the owners of a billing company. The plaintiff company was actually contracted to build for high-end medical procedures. And the specialist who they were doing billing for is a plastic surgeon, high-end plastic surgeon in Scottsdale, Arizona. I know you might know that there's quite a few of those in Scottsdale. The plaintiff company, the billing company, maintained that they did their billing correctly and that they did it on time. The plaintiff company gets paid a particular percentage of the revenue that they bring in for the doctor. And the way billings work for things like plastic surgery when you own your own facility is that the plastic surgery for doing a nose job or something like that could be $2,500 or $3,000. But the surgical fee for using the facility could be $10,000 or $15,000. So there's quite a bit of difference, which is why a lot of these medical specialists build their own surgical suites. So the defendant doctor and his surgical practice and surgical facility maintained that the plaintiffs didn't do their billing on time. In fact, that they were they were ignoring the small stuff. They were concentrating on the big ticket items, the surgical facility fees, and that they weren't really following up on getting paid for the actual procedures. So the case BS, that'd be before Scott. This was an interesting case because I ended up as a special master in this case. I was originally hired by an arbitrator to work out and give him data about the case because they were all arguing that there must be more data, there must be more reports. And of course, the billing company said, no, there's nothing else there. The doctor maintained, no, there must be more there. There must be more reports about when you did billing and how well you did billing and things like that. And so I was hired originally by the arbitrator to actually act as a special master. Special masters in the United States are unique and they're a lot of fun. I've done quite a few of those. I'm doing a very large one here in Arizona right now. You get access to almost everybody in the case to ask questions, to find out what's going on, figure out how things should be done, and you answer usually to the judge, or in this case, the case that's on the screen, or we're going to talk about the arbitrator in the case. And so you get a lot of fun because you have a lot of I don't want to say power, but you have a lot of freedom to talk to everybody in the case, which is pretty interesting. So there were procedural issues in this billing dispute. Like I said, the billing company was completely convinced that they had no way of producing any additional reports, which were key to the doctor approving his case. The arbitrator was a little slow in the draw. He didn't actually make any decisions about doing something about this until the eve of arbitration, and not quite the eve, but just a few months before the arbitration was supposed to actually happen. So it was very interesting, and we were originally asked to see if we could get this software started and actually operational on a machine where we would have access to this doctor's data, and to see if there are additional standardized reports. Unfortunately, as you all know, you can't just take and copy Word from one computer to another without highly specialized software, and some of that didn't exist back when we did this. So we were actually unable to get the software working, and so what we decided to do, with the blessing of the arbitrator, is actually extract the data out of the system, because I have a background in database programming. So I wanted to extract the data out of the system and actually see what the data showed, which is perfect, because this is what the data showed. And it was very interesting. You'll see that where the color changes, so do the dates. And by their very nature, most databases actually have this far left-hand column, which is called the record number. It might be akin to a line number in Excel, except that it can't change once it's in the database. So we were able to see that the record numbers were all consistent. They were in numeric order, but we also noticed that the actual date of the items was not in date order. And here comes metadata. So the metadata in this case had included the date it was entered, the time it was entered, and who entered the data. And so you'll notice that we're in 2009, we're in 2009, and then poof, we're back in December of 2006. Also of note is that these things were done over several months. And so what I mean by that is the billing company wanted to cover their tracks for several months of their transgressions, not just for single days and things like that. And so what they had done is they had actually told the system to run these statements, and they ran them actually to PDF, and instead of actually to paper, where they would have had to mail them, which would have cost them money. And they told it to run these statements to paper, and before they did that, they actually backdated the computer by going down to the date and time on the computer and opening up the calendar and telling it actually that instead of in March, or this was actually done in April of 2009, they rolled the calendar back to December 31st and then ran statements. And then they went back in and they went to January 31st of 2007, and ran statements, and then they did February, and then they did March. And so we're able to see this trail of the date it was entered and the time it was entered, to show that this data had actually been falsified. In addition, the person, SMW, those are the initials of the wife of the owner of the company. So they didn't have one of their employees go in and actually falsify this data. They actually did it themselves. Less witnesses that way. So in addition, we were looking at things like the background and whether or not the claim about their billing things that were small on time or big on time and things like that. And then also of interest is that we have these items that didn't make any sense. You can see here that the claim date for the first item, the $3,500 item, is in February of 2005, but the actual data entry date was in April of 2005. But then on the next line, which is it's all part of the same claim. It's not a separate claim, so it's all one transaction, two different line items. You'll see that the claim date was misentered on as 4/13 of 2005, and it was also data entered on that same day. Another important thing to note that I didn't cover is that when you do medical billing and you bill an insurance company or you bill Medicare, there's actually a timeout. There's a limit to how long you can wait to get the billing done, which was actually of note in this case. Most of them are 90 days. If you don't get your billing into the insurance carrier or to Medicare in 90 days, then you're not going to get paid. They're going to reject it. So that was important as a piece of evidence in this case, is how long it took them to actually get this data out the door and to the billing company, from the billing company to the insurance carrier, not only for cash flow for the doctor, but also to make sure that things were written off. And so you can see here that the big ticket item in this particular case was actually written off allegedly in in December of 2006, but that data entry actually didn't happen until 2009, which is much, much later. Questions? Answers? Everybody there?
I have a question, actually. How did you get that log to determine that it was a different date? I know you said you'd do it later, but it would help to understand. Was it in a hex file or?
Actually, it was a very specialized database that we had never seen before. We actually, I have programmers that work for me as part of what I do, because we're extracting data from all kinds of things all the time, and we don't ever know necessarily what that data is going to look like. So we were able to write some software that actually extracted the data. We didn't go all the way down to hex, but it was close. And then translated the data back into a table format that we could use. Really good question. But yeah, it was a specialized database that was unique to. There are other products that use that database, but it was something we hadn't seen before, so we had to do some research and figure out how to get the data out of it. We went right to the data.
You should sell it now.
Yeah. Well,
Ka-ching.
There are many things in my life I should have sold.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you.
Other questions? Awesome. So in hospital systems, and this will fit with what we discussed with electronic medical records, the lesser electronic medical record systems really don't do a really good job of protecting what's called the audit log or the audit trail. One of my specialties is that I used to actually sell medical systems. So we had database programmers that would help us modify, we'd buy it, we'd sell it to doctors' offices and hospitals and ambulance companies. We've been had a specialty in ambulance companies for a while, because they'll be billing about the same. And so the billing systems and the records keeping systems of all of these different types of medical providers are pretty similar. So fast forward into the fact that I had sold that company, which did all of that work, and got into doing just forensics. I kept the department in the company. That original company was called Great Scott Enterprises. And I created Evidence Solutions, which is the company that I work for now. And Evidence Solutions is just a derivative of that original company, but we no longer sold medical systems. But I found a niche where the now people needed to have somebody who really understood databases and could actually analyze data in the database to determine if modifications have been done. And I've done that actually all over the country. Sometimes it takes weeks and weeks to do. And there was one last year, just over a year ago, I was in upstate New Jersey, just outside of New York City, and proved it in about an hour and a half. So it just depends upon what you're looking for. In that particular case, the physician maintained that he had actually not, he'd seen the patient. The patient swore up and down, no, I didn't see this guy on this date. He did not inform me of the condition on this date. And that happened in 2000. The records, or the incident and the visit allegedly happened in 2016. And she ended up suing him in 2018, and shortly thereafter he papered the file by adding records into the electronic medical record system. Interestingly enough, it was after he turned off the audit log piece of the software that he had, and he also told it to erase the audit log. So not only did I have no audit trail to actually look at to help determine this, I had to go looking elsewhere for the data. So even though there are times when there's no data around,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Logs available.
Scott, can you go in
Yes.
with like Encase or other
I see.
software?
I'm on Zoom with the USA at the moment, but I've had a urine tract infection. And
There we go. That was about to become a HIPAA problem. So, Michael, your question, go for it.
Oh, can you use some software such as Encase or something of that nature to get in and find some of this metadata?
You certainly could, although we don't usually do that. We use database products to actually look at the metadata in electronic medical record systems, because that's where the data is stored. It's usually in some sort of a SQL file, whether it's Microsoft or Oracle or something along those lines. Those are big structured query language engines that maintain all of this data, but usually it's right at the database.
Okay. Can you go in with basically with some other software product and just write some SQL code to go in and find it?
Yes, and we frequently do that. Some of the big boys like Cerner and Epic have their own query type languages built in. Cerner especially, they're the giant in the room. Epic is almost the same size, but a little bit smaller. Cerner is certainly the 800-pound gorilla in the electronic medical record product. And they have their own, it's called the Cerner Query Language, or CQL. It might be another name. Cerner, anyway, it's like that. And it's very similar to SQL, but it's got an engine that helps manage what you see as an investigator. To keep you out of HIPAA sensitive things and the like. And by the way, all of this was mandated by federal law. What happened is these big companies like Cerner and Epic went and lobbied for what's called meaningful use. And what meaningful use is that they wanted everybody in the United States, I'd say on the planet, but that's not right. everybody in the United States who provides medical services to actually have the ability to fill in an electronic medical record system of some sort. The long term of that is that now, and it comes full circle with Corona COVID-2, the long term of that is that we should be able to determine where certain illnesses come from and how they track across the country and things like that by consolidating this massive amount of data that's being collected in the country. The unfortunate part is that we haven't gotten to the point where we can consolidate that data, but you can be darn sure that there's going to be a day when what you believe is your private interaction with your own doctor becomes a giant place to mine data to figure out that certain people named Michael who live in Temecula have a certain propensity for something that is unusual, and only people named Michael in Temecula can actually catch that disease or something. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Now, are any of these encrypted? Do they use something like MD5, RSA, or anything like that? So
yeah,
you actually need to figure out the keys.
Yeah, so all of the data in these giant electronic medical records, certainly the big ones, are all encrypted in the database, so somebody can't just walk off with a copy of the database, back it up, and then take off and get at the data. So these interfaces actually decrypt the data in real time when you're presenting it or extracting the data out of it. Good question. Yeah, it's all encrypted. So these medical systems and medical malpractice cases are pretty interesting because everybody believes that the audit trail is gospel, and that if there isn't an audit trail, then it never existed, and that if there is one, then it's actually perfect. And so what I'm going to do is lead you through an example of how that data can be manipulated, so you can see kind of how this works. So I became a patient of this doctor in 2013, and it's Dr. Jones, and he's my primary care physician. That's what PCP stands for. It's not the drug, I swear. And the data being written into the EMR is actually this particular information, and it ends up into something like this. The data on the left-hand side is the data that was entered, and we discussed database record numbers before. And so these things end up in an audit trail, and the field that was filled in was the first name, and it was blank before I arrived, or before it was ever used. This is a new record, and so it got my first name, and then my last name, and then the address, and so on. And so over time, somebody said, "Well, I want to actually manipulate that. I'm going to change my P.O. box from where I used to live to a new one, for instance." And so I get this new P.O. box 41150, and I make the change to the record, and the audit trail gets filled in just perfectly normal. That shows that it was box 42047, and it's now box 41150. The employee who made that change has an ID, and the data was actually changed. The address field was actually changed on 4/20/2013. So what if somebody wanted to actually just make a change? It's possible to edit both the patient record and the actual audit trail such that nobody would ever know. So if I went into the database that contained my demographic information, the fact that I'm a patient, and I wanted to update the date of my last visit, say I wanted to cover up as a doctor or a medical provider, I want to cover up when I last saw this person, then I would just make the change in the last visit field of the database. And I would do this through a database access. Usually the software is not going to allow you to actually make changes to that. So you're going to make a change in the back end by using the database manager, and then you can do the same thing in the audit trail. You're just going to change that field actually in the audit log. And so what this does is the change is made in both places, but the user, the audit trail is none the wiser. The data has actually been manipulated in the database engine itself. Questions on any of that?
How would you catch that?
Well, good question. So it turns out that metadata also can have metadata. Much like the physician who was in New Jersey, he covered his tracks pretty well by deleting the audit trail, but what he neglected to do is notice that some naming conventions had changed over time. And so he went back and tried to cover his tracks by putting in a file that was named wrong. And so that was the first clue. And then embedded into the electronic medical record system was a PDF document, which we're going to talk about in more detail. And that PDF document also had embedded information that showed that it was not from 2016, but rather it was from 2018. So while he tried to cover his tracks, he wasn't able to. In a case like this, it turns out the audit trail and the audit log table actually had metadata around it too. The database engine had its own metadata separate from the audit trail. And that's how I found this. Good question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mm-hmm. So this one was pretty fun. This actually happened out not far from where you live, Michael. This is in Southern California. Give you some background in this particular case, which was really kind of fun. In this particular case, there was a company that did injection molding plastic manufacturing, and the name of that company in this particular case is Lost Tech. And they were actually a provider of the product. Sometimes they hired a manufacturer to do it, but generally speaking, they had they made parts for hot tubs and pools and things like that. And so at issue in this case was the fact that this Robert Z. defendant gentleman who left the company was actually sued by the John Z. plaintiff guy who was still at the company and the owner of the company. And the claim was that the defendant actually had created a patent, applied for a patent, and had created this product separate from his employment at Lost Technologies. Of course, the plaintiff claimed quite the opposite, that he was actually part of the company when these PDF documents were created and when this product itself was created. And so in this particular case, we had some metadata that came out of the PDF, but it had been kind of manipulated. But the other piece that we had were these allegations that this data had been emailed around for a while. So back on March 3rd in 2006, John at Lost Tech sent an email to his manufacturer saying, here's a picture of the product that we discussed. This is what we want you to make. Now, what's interesting here is that he copies the defendant, but there's one piece of information that is really key, and that is that in the time frame between when this happened and when we did the investigation, they changed their domain. So they changed from Lost-Tech to Lost Technologies. And so it was pretty interesting to come up with the fact that these two domains, they're working for the same company. John and Robert are working for the same company, but they have different domains, which didn't seem to make any sense. In addition, down at the bottom, I went to this Lost Technologies domain, and he noticed that Robert claims that his email is Robert at Lost Technologies. And in addition, at the bottom is another thing that was curious. It said, this message is ready to be sent with the following file or link. And it's the image of the product. We got to thinking about this and said, well, that's a little odd. If it's ready to be sent, what does that mean? So we looked at the metadata for this particular item, and this is what some of the header information can be seen. And this is a little bit different view of what we saw from the email. Notice that the John P. At Lost Tech is here now. Mark, the manufacturer, is there, and it's March 3rd of 2006. And so we said, well, that just seems pretty odd that this message still seems to be ready to be sent. So we continued to dig deeper, and we noticed that this had been sent by another piece of embedded data that was in this particular email showed that it was Microsoft Exchange Server 6.5. We said, well, that's pretty interesting. And then the return path turns out to be blank. So by default, when you email somebody, it turns out that a return path gets created every time. And that's so that when, unless it's spoof email or garbage email, but by, the standard on the planet is that when I send something to one of you, the return path would be my email address. Well, in this particular case, that was blank, which was very curious. So we go back, and this is several weeks later, we wanted to know what other things we actually could figure out from this email system. And so we quizzed the defendant, who was actually who we were working for in this case. We said, look, do you have any other email that you had sent from your corporate email address to your personal email address? And he said, oh, yes, I used to send things all the time to my Yahoo address. So in this particular case, it was a funny MPEG that he had sent from his corporate email address. I think it was Dancing Nuns or something like that. And so this is after the incident, and he's sending it out from his Lost Technologies email address to his Yahoo address. And so we looked at that metadata and said, well, what does that look like? Now, this is a few weeks later, so we could look at this and say, well, okay, this is a newer version of Microsoft Exchange. Maybe they did an upgrade in this particular time frame. So that was reasonable. Okay, send it to his Yahoo address, and it's from the old domain of the Lost Technologies email addresses from the corporation. And notice that there's actually a return path. So the last thing that we said we wanted to look at was what other things could we glean from other emails in the system. And another thing that the actual plaintiff produced was another email, which was dated October 2nd of 2006, which they claimed that showed that they were already talking to this manufacturer much later. They were talking about producing this product, and they thought that they were papering the trail with email, trying to show that it was quite a bit different. Well, here's the problem. They actually showed that they were using this particular email, which was quite a bit later, that they were actually using Microsoft Exchange 14. The problem is that that particular version of Microsoft Exchange didn't come out until later of 2010 and the service pack in 2012, yet they produced this email as though it was created in 2006. So they had actually, again, modified the date and time on several machines in this particular case to actually come up with the fact that the plaintiff company actually had created this product when indeed they had not. Metadata is everywhere. Any questions on that? I look to my right because that's where the camera is. That's where I can see you all.
Really is everywhere.
It is everywhere. Yes, it is. All right.
I had a quick question. Do PDFs have thumbnails with a replication of the image like a photo does?
So actually, that's a really good question. So it's not that the photo has a thumbnail, it's that the operating system creates a thumbnail.
Okay.
And in some operating systems, there are actually thumbnails of other types of documents, mostly photos. So it's unusual to find thumbnails of other types of documents, but they do exist in certain places with certain versions.
Is there something similar? Like in a PDF, is there somewhere to see maybe what it looked like when it was created to see if anything matches?
Yeah, but it's not embedded in the PDF. There are records, and that's where we're going to go next. There are things in PDF that you can look at, but it's not a thumbnail of the PDF.
Okay.
Good question. All right. So what I'm going to do next, I can figure this out. I think I got this down. That should be, you see a PDF on the screen now with a purple top? So it's a PDF that I manipulated specifically for this particular presentation. And you can't tell if I printed this out, if I handed this to you in a courtroom and we took it and we printed it on a color printer, you couldn't tell that this has been manipulated. But in fact, there's a lot of data that, or things that are on this screen that don't belong. They have nothing to do with the person who was the driver. For instance, I don't even know how to drive a truck, but allegedly I was the driver in this particular case. I did redact some items here just so that that was clean. And so I'm clearly the driver up here, and I'm the signer down here. In addition, there are other things in this particular thing that, in this particular document that we're going to look at. But one of the things that you can do when you get a PDF document is you can actually just kind of poke around. And this is Nuance Power PDF. It's the, I don't use Adobe straight out of the box. I don't particularly care for Adobe products. Nuance is one of my favorites. I also use a product called Wondershare, which is a different PDF driver. And I'm happy to share the names of those or find them. And so this is a great PDF product. It allows me to mark it up. And in the expert witness work that I do, which generally I'm creating reports and I'm reading depositions and I'm analyzing all kinds of information, this is a really great product for making call outs and highlighting things and actually creating documents that I then either send to attorneys or present in court or something like that. So in this particular case, some of the things that I've manipulated, you can actually see as I move around. So we have a logo here, and we can notice that most of this appears to be scanned and is in black and white. And so that's a little odd. My signature, of course, is in color because I like to sign things in green. But the logo's in color, so that's a little odd. And as I hover over things, the cursor changes. And so I'm actually doing nothing but just moving the cursor around in this actual document. Some of the other things that you can do when you're looking at documents when they don't look to be authentic or they look to be manipulated is you can also click on things. So if I click on the logo, I can actually move that. Now here's one of the things about something that's been printed to PDF. When you print a PDF, generally speaking, these actual items are not going to be manipulatable anymore. They're going to be static. They're going to be held in place. Of course, you can do OCR and you can have it actually create images that are embedded in an OCR document and find those. But generally speaking, they're going to be pretty static. In other words, I'm not going to be able to move this Keep Trucking logo around because it's actually part of something that got printed. In addition to just the fact that the logo was inserted, I have something over here which is kind of interesting because that's my name, but yet what else is behind that is actually something that I'd already redacted. So instead of looking at, if I look at this, that looks just like, oh, Scott Greene must have been the driver in this particular case. There are things or clues that you can, by looking through PDF documents, that you can actually see that things are amiss. And it can go so far as I redacted this, there was somebody else's name up here, but in this particular case, if I say, well, there's my signature, oh, that's a different item as well. Wow, that was actually originally signed by somebody else. And so you can actually see that people have manipulated this particular document, me in particular, and it's difficult when you're just looking at it on the screen to actually tell. So some of the other things that you can look at for PDF documents. First of all, start with the properties.
Scott,
what do you know, Abby? Yes, sir.
If someone were to flatten it, make the manipulations, then flatten the document, how can you see below it?
Actually, when you flatten it, there are things that don't come out. There's metadata that gets left. If I really wanted to cover my tracks in this particular case, I would print this to another PDF. So I actually just say, let's print this, and I'm going to put it to back to this PDF writer or my Wondershare writer, and then a lot of that data actually goes away, and you won't be able to actually find that the metadata that or anything that shows that it was manipulated. What you bring up is a really good point, and I stress this with other experts. When you are creating documents that you're sharing with attorneys that you're working for, attorneys on the other side, or things like that, always, always, always tell your Word document or tell Word or your word processor to actually print to PDF. Don't save as PDF. Don't do anything other than print to PDF, because what it does is that it takes out all of that metadata on the front end, so that when it gets to the other side, one of the first things that I do when I look at things is, okay, I've got this document. Huh, who wrote this document? Oh, some guy named Brent Upton. So as experts, and you all are experts out in the field, I presume, and you're producing reports and things like that, please print to PDF. It'll save you headaches in the end by not distributing other metadata that you might have. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Good advice. Thank you.
did. Yep, thanks.
So other things that you can look at, just the metadata. And again, I'm just in a pretty standard particular product here. We can see that, let's go back one couple of things here. This was actually printed or as data actually from December 2 of 2015. And yet if we go into the metadata and look at it, we can see, well, there's a date for 2018, which was when this PDF document was created. And that's possible because the underlying data is older than that. And then there's this date of 2020, 5/27, which is, of course, today when I actually originally, which I last modified this particular document. Some of these other ones are pretty interesting. The application, this was actually created, the original PDF document, and this is still embedded in it, even though I have manipulated it with various programs. The original PDF program that created this was actually Adobe Acrobat Pro 11.0.23. Now it's important that and there are places to look this up, you can look at data, especially when things are backdated. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of those, that you can look much like in that Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access, or not Excel, I'm sorry, Microsoft Exchange and Microsoft Outlook. You can look to see what actually produced it and what version it was, because sometimes they'll leave a clue that it's a version that wasn't even around back when they alleged this document was created. In addition to some of those properties, one of the things that I also look for are things that are what are called comments. By the standard of a PDF, which is, by the way, an open standard, it is not is frequently thought to be owned. The standard is actually thought to be owned by Adobe, but it's not. It's actually an open standard, which is why there's plenty of products out there that can read and display and manipulate PDF documents. By the standard, comments can also be embedded into a document. Now, the standard in this particular case, this particular product, actually every time I manipulate something, it actually gives me some information about what I've manipulated. So the first thing I did when I was manipulating this earlier was actually to add some information to the document and put in a signature, and that happened allegedly on this particular date. And then I did another one, I put the stamp in there. Actually, this was when I did some redaction. This is when I put the stamp in there. And then this is where I created this text box up here. This was actually only created this afternoon. This is a different time zone, so never mind the time zone because I use different time zones on my computer. But you can see that this has happened at a different particular time than when the document was created. And then I put in another stamp, which was the actual logo. I added it to this document. And this is all standard. This is not a fancy program necessarily. It's certainly part of what's built into this nuance program. It's pretty powerful, but most of them will let you look at and view this metadata and the other things that are embedded into a particular PDF. Any questions on any of that?
Scott,
Yes,
Scott, hello.
I can hear you.
This is Ann Smith again. You said to print this rather than save it. When you go back, 5 minutes ago in your lecture, and you said print it rather than save it.
Yes.
How do you save your print without printing it?
You have
In
to
other
print.
words, print, but you have to print it. You can't go there and then save it. I know that doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense to me.
No, it's a digital function. It's not print to, it's instead of saying, it's like save as, but it's print to PDF. It's within the computer. It never gets out of the computer like a printer. The
Right.
printer is your computer. And so when you're saying print to PDF, it's creating a PDF within the computer. So that's what that is.
Okay, I'll try it on something and see what happens. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I will actually, I'm going to display, in fact, we could go there next. Here's an Excel document. So just in this particular case, this is a little bit different case, but this is actually data from a case that I worked. You can see that what I did is analyze the data that came out of the PDF documents. I had the file name, of course. I had who the author was, which was embedded into the file. Looney, we've changed the name to protect the innocent again. The date printed on the document. So this is the date that actually shows that this is when this document was printed. So it'd be as if the date of the letter or the date of a document. But we see that this is 10/7 of 2011. But sometimes there's some internal create dates that either precede that date or after that date. And that all just depends upon how things have been manipulated. So there can be times when you will see an internal create date that actually is before the actual document was created. And you'll notice that was true in this document that I just showed you. If you look at this create date, if I manipulated this document today, but to catch up and display, the actual create date was back in 2018. And so you can have manipulations that happen later, and so you have to account for those. You can have manipulations that happened earlier too, because the create date was also manipulated, or it's created in a different way. So back to this document, this is one of the ways that we were able to look through this particular set of documents. So basically, what's happening here is that a set of people, Looney, decided that she had applied for a multi-million-dollar loan, and one of her insurance carriers came back and said, we're not going to insure that because we don't see any way for you to actually ever pay that back. The bank got wind of that and said, well, if you can't buy insurance, we're not going to actually lend you the money. And so what she did is she turned around and sued her insurance carrier. And I'm abbreviating, but essentially that's what happened. There were some letters back and forth regarding some investments and whether there was value in those investments for backing up this big loan. And so she produced all of these documents that she claimed were where the different banks, the IHG, which is a big hotel group, international hotel group. Utes is actually a big, Native American tribe, which has a vast amount of wealth, and they were supposedly going to also loan her money and help develop this thing in a foreign country, Mexico, actually. And so there's all kinds of things that we analyzed, and so this is a kind of a catalog that we went through We noticed that this was actually originally created with Microsoft Office Publisher, which would allow you to manipulate items in a particular document. They had different versions of PDF. There's different standards out there. For some reason, we had some 2007 document created with Microsoft Publisher, and we also had a Word document down here. But that Word document predates some of these publisher documents, and so there was a lot of things that we actually had to prove. Based upon the work that I did, what ended up happening is we actually got the attorney who was working on this for the insurance company actually got and won a motion for summary judgment, so it was thrown out of court. Questions?
May I ask a question? It's wonderful to have you here, Scott. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I had a certificate come in this weekend in a rush case. Of course, they're always, and it's marked, it's part of the reverse mortgage scandal. And the woman received an original, there's an original stamped on certificate. And she says it's not her signature. Now, if it is marked an original and it has been manipulated and put there, is there any way, we saw how you took your green signature and there was something underneath it. Can you just put original and it means nothing on there?
Oh, sure.
Do I make sense?
Absolutely. I could do something like, yeah, it makes really good sense. I can do something like, let's not do that one. We'll mark this document as draft, and I just make this up, but I'm gonna mark this particular document as draft. And, I can't on this one because it's an image. I can do it on another one. But yes, you can do that. You can you can do whatever you want to.
So you could drop original and it has been mechanically put there with somebody with your skill level. And she said she never signed it, but I think it's a genuine signature. That is your signature. You might not have put it there. Well, yes, you did. But that's how it could be a genuine signature on a document that has been manipulated in this reverse mortgage scandal of 10 or 12 years ago.
Yep.
If
that
they're
correct?
saying it's original, wouldn't you want to examine the ink to see if it's wet ink?
That's what I told her. I said, if it is an original, let's get the ink. But I have had cases where they have manipulated the signature and then printed that and then gone over it. And they were only caught because they went over the manipulated signature with a pen. But because
I go to the courthouse and I examine documents all the time. I've done over 100 cases in the last couple of years on mortgage fraud, and they purport it to be an original, and I go there and it's a color copy.
yeah, that's what I'm expecting is the case here.
So
Thank you very
that's
much,
what I would
Scott
do.
and Leland.
I suggest you ask for the originals to be examined.
Right, well, that was my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. So let's look at a couple other things. I think I'm not sure how much time we have. We're at about an hour, so let's see if we can just hustle through a couple of other things that you should look for. So I've been cleaning my office, but I had this document and made it to the shredder yet, so I used it as an example here. So a couple of things that you might notice about this particular PDF is that it's not quite centered on the page. It's not quite square. And what that means is it's probably a scan. So anything that's going to be printed to PDF is actually going to be very square on a page. Another way that I wanted to show you to look at this is that this is just a PDF, but the other metadata in here is that this came from I'm not sure why it's not displaying this stuff right lickety split. This actually came from a brother's scanner.
Scott? Linda
yes.
again. Sorry to interrupt, but isn't there a function, if I remember correctly, called skewing? When a document comes in all wacky like that, off center, there's a thing called skewing that you can center and make it right.
Yep.
Do I remember that?
So, yes, and so what we did is, in this case, this is the original, and then what I did is I went back and I de-skewed it. And I actually OCR'd this particular one, and the way that you can tell it's OCR is that you can manipulate it. You can copy and paste text and things like that. So same document, the metadata is still going to show that it came from a brother printer. It shows up, there's the brother scanner system, so it's the same document. The only thing I did is update it and tell it to actually OCR it, which actually de-skewed it.
Scott, how can you tell
Explain
if a
that
document
again.
has been OCR'd?
The way that you can tell that a document has been OCR'd is that you can actually select the text. So if I look at this original that is not, that's not been OCR'd, and I use the pointer mouse, I notice that I don't get a bar, and I can't actually, you know, I can select this, but it's actually an image. It's not text. I can't actually select Scott Greene in here. But if I go to the one that has been OCR'd, I can actually do that. Again, go back to the pointer and come up to here and notice that the actual pointer changed, the mouse pointer changed, and now I can copy Scott Greene right from that.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome. One more document I want to go through. This is actually a real document out of a case, and it's been mostly redacted so that there's not much in here. Same case, but different set of documents. And so one of the things that was odd about this is that they produced all these documents, and then their mistake was that they produced them in PDF, because we wanted to go all the way back to the PDF documents, as far back to the original documents as we could. They allegedly lost the computer, and then they lost a hard drive, and da-da-da-da-da. And my actual opponent in this particular case, the expert hired by the other side, came back and said, well, the PDF documents aren't originals anyway, and they can be manipulated, so nobody can rely on any of this. That's fine. That didn't really end up meaning a hill of beans, because the judge saw through that. But again, one of the things that I want to show you is that, like, that particular logo is actually just an item inside this document. And so the other thing is that this was created in December of 2012. We look at the metadata. Well, that's a little odd. It was actually created in 12/19 of 2011. And so what they had done is they'd actually taken another document that they had, put new words, put new signatures and stuff like on this particular one. So even though this was created before that, they manipulated it later and actually changed some of these dates and things. Another thing that's pretty obvious here is that this is also something that is it's an image, not text. Again, if I put the text, put the mouse up here, it changes to a vertical bar, and I can select data and select text. But no such luck on this Sincerely or Frank Johnson. So this actually was taken out of another document and then put onto this particular document. So those are the things that I wanted to discuss today. I'm open for questions, suggestions. Metadata is
You
everywhere.
gave us some great ideas on how to manipulate stuff.
Hey, don't use it for criminal work or anything like that. Use it for good.
I'm a nice
Scott, I've got a
criminal.
question.
And there's some pretty powerful tools that let you alter the created. And
How good is like DocuSign and Adobe Sign as far as the metadata or the audit trail you get from those? How easy are those to manipulate by somebody?
Actually, very good question. I'm actually working a couple of cases right now with DocuSign, and DocuSign is rock solid. It's rock solid. I mean, I can trace it back with DocuSign. I can trace it back to an IP address. So if there are multiple computers, a public IP address, so if there's multiple computers behind that, the router, we're not going to know exactly which one of those it is from the data we get from DocuSign. However, the data from DocuSign is then on the computer that actually did it. So if I have 5 computers in that office, theoretically I could look at the data that's on those 5 computers and prove which of those 5 computers was used to DocuSign that particular document. But it's going to be a big thing coming up because, of course, there's social distancing. Nobody's actually even doing notaries and stuff like that. And they've actually come up with protocols to allow people to notarize documents electronically, which is pretty interesting.
Although DocuSign really came to be because of the vulnerabilities of things like PDF, because it's so easy to manipulate it after the fact.
Right. True.
Do you believe that there is a possibility that people will be able to manipulate mail-in ballots, or do you think this is just a story?
Well,
I just heard it.
It is still, so I'll talk about two different sides of that because I know both, actually. It is possible for mail-in ballots, of course, to be manipulated, just like as you all know, that data could be manipulated. Duplicates could be created. People have the ability to create, using the color printer at their home, a fabulous array of documents that look exactly like the original. So I understand that of course, and you all know that as well, that somebody could use that for bad. There's, of course, ways to protect that. We would look for things like the fact that this person had already voted, or maybe this person was registered to vote, and things like that will help. The long term of that is we got a ways to go yet, but digital voting is coming. You'll be able to do it from your home. Now we pretty much all have cameras anyway. Anybody that has a laptop has a camera, and we have cameras, of course, that we use everywhere. And we'll see things that do facial recognition. Yes, your face has been given up. People know, the government knows when you're passing through airports and things like that. Not quite as bad as China. China really has their people locked down. But there are solutions, but we're not ready for either of those solutions to be the mainstream yet. We're just not. That's my opinion.
And there's another piece to that, and I'd let Doug Cobb comment on this, but if someone makes a copy of the ballot and prints them out, the paper stock would not be the correct paper stock.
True, but they're handled generally by scanners for the vote. And so how many of those would actually, if you have a city, I mean, I live in Tucson, Arizona, it's 1 million people. Let's assume just a third of those people vote by mail. That's 300,000 ballots that you would want people to examine.
No. But what I'm saying,
let me give you some insight where the technology is going. Actually, the state of Georgia is using this already. They've got a primary coming up, and there's 2 companies that make some of the paper that utilizes the technology, and there is a invisible. It's an infrared detection powder that goes into the manufacturing of the paper that is readable by a unique scanner. It's actually at a certain frequency. So as those things are read and go through, they can kick out documents that don't read and don't have that material inside the paper. It's really, really cool technology.
And so that's in use now in Georgia. You know, if that's used across the country, or is that still in development?
Well, they're working on that. I think that's one of the things that they're looking at, but you don't really hear so much about it. But yeah, I've got some good friends inside that world that are some pretty cool stuff coming out there.
Great, glad to hear.
So it's yeah, which is great. It's good to hear that there's something
Scott,
out there that is, I think, going to be pretty solid.
Scott, it's Spencer in the Chicago area. I ran across something called Blue Dot Network out of Canada. Are you aware of that?
I am. Yeah, Blue Dots are embedded on, created on print documents on that come out of laser printers.
Okay. Well, what this one has to do with is you talked earlier about they were going to find out where an illness had started, or the virus had started, that kind of thing. This Blue Dot Network out of Canada supposedly is able to do that and has been doing that for a number of years. I didn't know if you were aware of that group.
Oh, okay. No, as it relates to the medical world, I am not.
Okay, okay. Well, I heard about it, and then I haven't heard anything more about it, so I don't know. It might have been bogus. Who knows?
No, there is that technology out there, and some of them are yellow dots. But you've got to have basically access to the FBI in order to be able to get at that information and data. But they do actually put encryption codes of the where the printers and stuff where it came off of, and the dates time stamped and all that.
Sure.
Right. That's what I thought you were referring to. If it's referring to things that are medical related, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
In relation to the medical related information, I've done a lot of presentations for doctors and dentists regarding their prescription pads. And it's interesting how they have the security paper for the prescription pads so that you cannot photocopy them. And because if you try to, all of this invisible writing pops up and says it's void. So the security papers that are pretty interesting. Maybe they'll resort to that with our ballots.
Could be. Sure.
It would be lovely not to get sick when you go vote.
That would be a good thing. I'd rather vote in my living room.
Yeah.
Dirty paper.
Great presentation, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. I'm glad I was able to twist your arm to come and speak to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Glad you did that, Reed.
All right.
Thanks, Scott. Very interesting.
Dirty paper by taking a picture of it with your cell phone.
Glad you enjoyed it.